We had just caught my husband and his business partner together in a cheap motel room. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, hard need for justice. We sat in the car, waiting for them to come out, ready to dictate the terms of their surrender. We sat in the car with the engine running, the heater blasting warm air against our frozen feet. Outside, the snow was falling harder, turning the neon sign of the Galaxy Inn into a blurry smear of pink light. Clara was shivering in the passenger seat, her hands wrapped protectively around her stomach. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring out the windshield with a look of hard determination that I hadn't seen before. The girl who had opened the door in pajamas 2 days ago was gone, replaced by a woman who had seen the ugly truth and survived it. "He looked so small," Clara whispered, breaking the silence. She didn't look at me, just kept her eyes on the motel room door. In my head, he was this powerful, successful man who was going to save me. But back there, he just looked like a scared little boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Power is a trick of the light, Clara," I replied, adjusting the rearview mirror to check my lipstick. I needed to look impeccable for what was coming next. Richard only seemed big because he made us feel small. But the lights are on now. 5 minutes later, exactly as I had demanded, the door to room 104 opened. Richard and Marcos stepped out into the biting wind. They looked ridiculous. Richard had buttoned his coat wrong in his haste, and Marcos was shivering violently in a suit jacket that wasn't designed for Chicago winters. They walked towards my car like men marching to the gallows, their heads down, their shoulders hunched against the cold and the shame. Richard tapped on my window, his face pale and streaked with sweat, despite the freezing temperature. I didn't unlock the doors. I simply rolled the window down 2 inches, just enough to let his voice in but keep his presence out. It was a petty power move, and I savored every second of it. "Jade," he started, his teeth chattering. "We need to talk about this rationally. You can't just leave like this. We have assets. We have a reputation. You can't blow up my life over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "A misunderstanding is forgetting to pick up dry cleaning, Richard. Sleeping with your business partner while your pregnant mistress waits at home is a lifestyle choice." I looked past him to Marcos, who was refusing to make eye contact. "Here is how this is going to work. Listen closely, because I am only going to say this once." I saw him flinch. He was used to the Jade who asked for permission to buy a new handbag. He wasn't ready for the Jade who had spent 15 years reading his contracts and knowing where the bodies were buried. "You are going to file for an uncontested divorce on Monday morning. Irreconcilable differences, no drama, no court battles." "And the terms?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as the businessman in him tried to surface. "I keep the penthouse until I decide to sell it. I get half of the liquid assets, as per the law. But here is the part where you pay for your silence," I said, gesturing to Clara next to me. "You will set up a trust fund for this baby, a generous one. And you will transfer the deed of Clara's house into her name, fully paid off, by the end of the week." Richard looked at Clara, then back at me. "And if I say no? If I fight you on the house?" "Then I drive from here straight to Susan's house," I said simply. "And then I call the ethics board at Marcus's law firm. And then I call your investors." I leaned closer to the gap in the window. "I will burn your reputation to the ground, Richard. You will be toxic. No one will do business with a man who lies to 2 women and his best friend's wife." Marcos grabbed Richard's arm. "Just do it, Rick. Give her whatever she wants. We can't let Susan know." The fear in his voice was palpable. They were trapped, and they knew it. Richard let out a long, defeated sigh, his breath clouding in the air. He looked at Clara one last time, perhaps searching for the adoration he used to find there. But Clara just stared back, her face blank and unforgiving. "Fine," he muttered. "You win. I'll have the lawyers draw it up." "Good choice," I said. "Do not contact me. Do not contact her. Speak only to my attorney." I rolled up the window, cutting off his protest. The sound of the glass ceiling shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I put the car in drive and pulled away slowly, leaving my husband and his lover standing in the slush of a motel parking lot. I didn't look back. As we merged onto the highway, heading back towards the city lights, the tension in the car finally broke. Clara let out a long breath and slumped back against the seat. "You were amazing," she said, looking at me with awe. "You just handled him. You saved us." "We saved ourselves, Clara," I corrected her, though I couldn't suppress a small smile. I reached across the console and took her hand. It was trembling, but her grip was strong. "He's gone. He can't hurt you anymore. You have the house. You have money for the baby. You're free." "We're free," she echoed, squeezing my hand back. "So what do we do now? You're going back to that big empty apartment?" I looked at the road ahead, stretching out into the darkness. The thought of my pristine, cold penthouse suddenly felt unbearable. I didn't want to be alone with the ghosts of my marriage. I wanted heat. I wanted noise. I wanted life. "Actually," I said, making a split-second decision that would change everything, "I don't think I want to be alone tonight. Do you mind if I crash on your lumpy sofa? I think we have some celebrating to do." I woke up the next morning with a stiff neck and the smell of burnt toast filling my nose. For a terrifying second, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling was too low, the paint was peeling in the corner, and the silence of my soundproofed penthouse was replaced by the distant rumble of a snowplow clearing the street. Then I turned my head and saw the stack of baby books on the coffee table, and the memories of the night before came rushing back. I wasn't Mrs. Richard Bittencourt anymore. I was just Jade, sleeping on a lumpy beige sofa in a stranger's house, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of vanilla and dog hair, even though Clara didn't have a dog. I sat up, expecting to feel triumphant. I had won. I had destroyed the men who tried to play us. But as I looked around the messy, vibrant little living room, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt hollow. The anger that had fueled me for the last 48 hours had evaporated, leaving behind a vast, echoing emptiness. My marriage was over. My identity as a wife was gone. I was 38 years old, and I was technically homeless by choice. "Good morning," Clara chirped from the kitchen. She was wearing a t-shirt that stretched tight over her belly, flipping pancakes with a spatula that looked like it had survived a war. She looked lighter, younger. The shadows under her eyes were still there, but the fear was gone. "I hope you like blueberry pancakes. It's the only thing I know how to make without burning the house down." I tried to smile, but my face felt stiff. "Coffee is fine," I managed to say. I watched her move around the tiny kitchen, humming a pop song. She was resilient. She was bouncing back because she had a reason to, the life growing inside her. I realized with a pang of jealousy that I didn't have a next chapter. I just had a closed book. After breakfast, I told Clara I needed to go back to the penthouse to pack a bag. She offered to come with me, but I shook my head. "I need to do this alone," I said. "I need to say goodbye to the mausoleum." The drive back to the Gold Coast felt like driving to a funeral. The doorman tipped his hat to me, unaware that I was walking into my life for the last time as a resident. The elevator ride was silent and smooth. When the doors opened directly into the foyer, the apartment hit me with its perfection. Everything was white, chrome, and marble. It was beautiful. It was expensive. And it was completely dead. I walked into the master bedroom. The bed was still made, crisp and military tight, just how Richard liked it. I opened the closet. The the same closet where I had found the receipt 3 days ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed. I pulled out a suitcase and started throwing things in. Cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, my jewelry box. But halfway through, my hands stopped working. I sank down onto the plush carpet, clutching a hanger with a dress I had worn to our 10th anniversary dinner. I remembered that night. Richard had spent the entire evening on his phone, and I had spent the entire evening smiling until my jaw ached, telling everyone how lucky I was. I wasn't crying because I missed him. I was crying because I missed me. I mourned the 15 years I had spent shrinking myself to fit into his life, starving for affection that he was giving to someone else, or in this case, lying to everyone about. The tears came then, ugly and jagged. I curled into a ball on the floor of my $1 million closet and wailed. I cried for the baby I never had. I cried for the career I gave up to be a trophy wife. I cried until my throat was raw, and my mascara was smeared across my cheeks like war paint. I stayed there for an hour, letting the grief wash over me like a tidal wave, drowning the last remnants of the perfect, poised Jade. When the tears finally stopped, I felt strangely light, scoured clean. I stood up, wiped my face, and finished packing. I didn't take everything. Just the clothes I liked, my books, and my documents. I left the diamonds he bought me. I left the furs. I left the art. Those things belonged to Mrs. Bittencourt, and she didn't exist anymore. I drove back to Clara's house in a daze. When she opened the door and saw my red, puffy eyes, she didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer platitudes. She just opened her arms. I walked into her embrace, burying my face in her shoulder. She smelled of maple syrup and soap. She held me while I shook, her hand rubbing my back in slow, soothing circles, the same way I had rubbed hers the night before. "I've got you," she whispered into my hair. "You're safe here." We spent the rest of the day on the sofa, watching bad reality TV and eating leftover pancakes. We didn't talk about Richard. We didn't talk about the divorce lawyers I would have to call on Monday. We just existed in the same space, two shipwreck survivors clinging to the same raft. "You know," Clara said as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor, "you can't sleep on this sofa forever. It's terrible for your back." "I'll find a hotel tomorrow," I mumbled, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. The thought of a sterile hotel room made my stomach turn, but I didn't want to intrude. "Don't be stupid," Clara said, poking my arm. "The spare room is full of boxes, but there's a bed. It's small, but it's yours, if you want it." She looked at me, her expression shy but hopeful. "I don't want to be alone, Jade. And I don't think you do either." I looked at her, this girl who had been my enemy for a day and my savior for 2. I thought about my empty, cold penthouse, and then I looked at the warm, messy, imperfect house around me. "Okay," I said, a genuine smile finally breaking through the grief. "But we're painting that room. I can't live with lime green walls." 2 weeks had passed since the night at the Galaxy Inn, and my life had become unrecognizable in the best way possible. The silence of my penthouse was just a memory now, replaced by the constant, comforting hum of Clara's house. I had traded my stilettos for thick wool socks, and my evenings at charity galas for nights spent assembling Swedish furniture. We were building a nest, not just for the baby, but for ourselves. I had officially moved into the spare room, which was no longer a storage unit for boxes, but a cozy sanctuary painted a soft, calming sage green. The days fell into a rhythm that felt more natural than anything I had experienced in 15 years of marriage. In the mornings, while Clara slept in, exhausted by the final stretch of her pregnancy, I would make breakfast. I learned that she liked her eggs scrambled with cheese, and that she couldn't start the day without a glass of orange juice. I found a strange satisfaction in these small acts of service. Making coffee for Richard had felt like a duty. Making breakfast for Clara felt like a gift. By the afternoon, the house would be filled with the smell of whatever recipe we were attempting that day. I, who had never cooked a meal in my life thanks to a rotation of private chefs, was learning to chop vegetables without slicing my fingers. Clara would sit on a stool at the counter, her belly pressing against the edge, instructing me with a patience that bordered on saintly. We laughed over burnt sauces and unevenly cut carrots, a genuine, belly-deep laughter that seemed to heal the cracks in my soul. Richard was becoming a ghost. The lawyers were handling the divorce, and thanks to the leverage we had, he was signing everything without a fight. He was a signature on a document, a name on a check, but he was no longer a presence in our lives. We didn't talk about him. We didn't need to. We were too busy debating names for the baby, or deciding which onesies were the softest. The baby had become our baby. I knew I wasn't the biological mother, but every time I folded a tiny shirt or researched pediatricians, I felt a fierce, protective love taking root. One evening, we were sitting on the living room rug, surrounded by piles of laundry. The Chicago wind was battering the windows, but inside the heating was on, and we were warm. Clara was folding a yellow blanket, her movements slow and deliberate. Suddenly, she stopped and gasped, her hands flying to her stomach. Her eyes went wide, not with pain, but with surprise. "Jade," she whispered, looking up at me with an urgency that made my heart jump. "Come here, quick." I dropped the towel I was holding and scrambled over to her on my knees. "What is it? Is something wrong?" Panic flared in my chest instantly. We were still a few weeks away from the due date. "No, nothing's wrong," she said, a wide smile breaking across her face. She grabbed my hand and pulled it towards her. "He's awake. He's really moving tonight. I want you to feel it." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Touching her belly felt like crossing a line, a sacred boundary between the biological mother and the woman who was just there. But Clara didn't give me a choice. She pressed my palm firmly against the side of her stomach, right over the tight fabric of her shirt. Her skin was warm, radiating a heat that seemed to seep into my cold fingers. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, against my palm, I felt a distinct, strong thud, a kick, a tiny life asserting its presence in the world. My breath hitched in my throat. It was the most miraculous thing I had ever felt. Tears pricked my eyes, sudden and hot. I looked at Clara, and she was watching me with a softness that stole the air from my lungs. "He knows you're there," she said softly. "He knows your voice. You talk to him all the time." "I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. I hadn't realized it, but I suppose I did. I narrated my cooking disasters to the bump. I read out loud from my books while she napped. "You do," she confirmed, covering my hand with hers, trapping my warmth against her skin. "You're going to be a great mom, Jade. I don't care what the birth certificate says. This baby is lucky to have two people who love him this much." The word mom hung in the air between us, heavy and sweet. I wasn't just a roommate or a friend. I was a parent. I was part of the family. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. We were sitting so close our knees were touching, my hand on her child, her hand on mine. I looked at her lips, pink and dry from the winter air, and felt a pull so strong it frightened me. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was desire. I pulled my hand back slowly, afraid that if I stayed there any longer, I might do something reckless like kiss her. We should finish the laundry," I stammered, my face flushing. "Before the movie starts." Clara watched me retreat, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She didn't push it. She just picked up another tiny sock and started folding. But the energy in the room had shifted. The domestic bubble we had built was no longer just safe. It was charged with a potential that we were both beginning to acknowledge. As I lay in my bed that night, listening to the wind howl outside, I realized I wasn't thinking about the divorce or the scandal. I was thinking about the warmth of her skin and the way she had looked at me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't dreading the future. I couldn't wait for tomorrow. To keep ourselves sane during the final weeks of Clara's pregnancy, we decided we needed a distraction that didn't involve divorce paperwork or assembling cribs. Clara suggested a pottery class at a small, dusty studio in Wicker Park. I initially resisted, thinking of my manicured nails and my aversion to mess, but looking at her hopeful face, I couldn't say no. We signed up for a Tuesday night workshop, hoping to turn lumps of gray clay into something beautiful, or at least something that could hold coffee. The studio was warm and smelled of wet earth and kiln dust, a scent that was surprisingly grounding. We were the only 2 students that evening, which made the cavernous room feel intimate, like a private world where the rules of the outside didn't apply. I sat at my wheel, feeling ridiculous in a borrowed apron that was covered in dried splatters from previous students. Clara sat at the wheel next to me, her belly pressing against the tray, laughing as she tried to center her clay. "You're overthinking it, Jade," she teased, watching me struggle to keep my mound of clay from wobbling off the spinning wheel. "You're trying to control it like a contract negotiation. You have to be gentle. You have to feel it." I sighed, frustration bubbling up. "I don't feel mud, Clara. I organize things. This is chaos." "Here, let me show you," she said, grunting slightly as she stood up and waddled over to my station. She didn't ask for permission. She just stepped behind my stool and leaned over me, her arms coming around my sides to cover my hands with hers. The contact was electric. Her chest was pressed against my back, her chin resting near my shoulder so she could see the wheel. I could feel the heat radiating from her, a sharp contrast to the cool, wet clay spinning beneath our fingers. My breath hitched, and I prayed she wouldn't notice how my heart had suddenly hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Relax your hands," she whispered, her voice right next to my ear. It sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty room. "Don't fight the spin. Guide it." I closed my eyes and let her take the lead. Her hands were strong and confident, molding the clay with an ease I envied. Under her guidance, the wobbling stopped. The gray lump smoothed out, rising into a cylinder, transforming under our combined touch. My hands were slippery with water and slip, sliding against hers in a messy, intimate dance. It was the most erotic thing I had ever experienced, and we were fully clothed in a room full of unbaked bowls. "See?" she murmured, her cheek brushing against my hair. "You just have to let go." We stayed like that for a long moment, the wheel humming hypnotically, the wet clay spinning between our interlaced fingers. I wasn't thinking about the bowl anymore. I was thinking about how perfectly her body fit against mine. I was thinking about how much I wanted to lean back into her embrace and never leave. The line between friend helping friend and something else was blurring with every rotation of the wheel. Eventually, the clay began to sag, the walls getting too thin from our distraction. Clara laughed, a low, throaty sound that vibrated through my back. "Okay, I think we killed it," she said, pulling away slowly. The loss of her warmth was immediate and jarring. I missed her before she had even fully stepped back. She went back to her own wheel, wiping her hands on a rag, leaving streaks of gray on her forehead. She looked wild and beautiful, a mess of clay and color and life. I watched her, mesmerized. She caught me staring and grinned, a smudge of clay on her nose making her look impossibly endearing. "What?" she asked, tilting her head. "Do I have something on my face?" "You have a little bit of everything on your face," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. I reached out, my thumb tracing the line of her jaw to wipe away a spot of dried clay. The gesture was automatic, something a mother might do, or a lover. Clara went still under my touch. She didn't pull away. She leaned into my hand, her eyes searching mine, dark and dilated in the dim light of the studio. The air between us thickened, heavy with unspoken questions. For a second, I thought she was going to say something, maybe acknowledge the tension that had been building since the night at the motel. But then the instructor walked back into the room, clapping his hands and announcing that it was time to clean up. The moment shattered like an unfired pot. We both jumped, pulling away from each other guiltily. "Right," Clara said, her voice a little too high. "Cleanup time." We spent the drive home in a comfortable silence, but something had changed. The energy in the car wasn't just friendly anymore. It was charged. Every time she shifted in her seat, I was hyper-aware of her presence. And when we got home, instead of going straight to our separate rooms, we lingered in the kitchen, drinking tea, neither of us wanting the night to end. The clay was washed off our hands, but the feeling of her skin against mine was something I couldn't scrub away. The storm that had been threatening Chicago all week finally broke on Friday night. Rain lashed against the windows of the bungalow like gravel, but inside the spare room, now officially the nursery, it was warm and bright. We had spent the last 6 hours painting the walls a soft, calming shade of sage green. The room smelled of fresh latex paint and the pepperoni pizza we had devoured sitting on the drop cloths. I was exhausted in a way I hadn't been in years. My muscles ached from rolling paint on the ceiling, and I knew my expensive manicure was ruined forever. But I felt a strange, deep satisfaction. I sat back on my heels, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand, and looked at our handiwork. The room was transformed. It wasn't a storage closet anymore. It was a sanctuary. "We missed a spot," Clara said, pointing to a patch near the baseboard with her paintbrush. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor next to me, wearing a pair of my old yoga pants that stretched over her belly and a t-shirt covered in green splatters. She looked tired but radiant, her hair falling out of its messy bun. "I didn't miss it," I defended myself, feigning indignation. "I was leaving it for artistic effect." Clara laughed, that rich, throaty sound that had become my favorite music. "You're a terrible liar, Jade. For a lawyer, you have zero poker face." She leaned over to dab the spot with her brush, but in her clumsiness, she slipped on the plastic sheeting. She didn't fall, but her brush flailed, leaving a streak of sage green paint right across my cheekbone. I gasped, touching my face. "You did not just do that." "Oops," Clara giggled, though her eyes were dancing with mischief. "Now you match the walls. It brings out the green in your eyes." "Oh, is that so?" I grabbed my own brush, dipping it into the tray. "Let's see what brings out the brown in yours." I lunged forward, intending to swipe a little paint on her nose, playful retaliation. But Clara wasn't as slow as she looked. She caught my wrist mid-air. We froze. The playfulness evaporated instantly, replaced by that heavy magnetic pull that had been stalking us for weeks. We were kneeling on the floor, inches apart. Her hand was still wrapped around my wrist, her grip firm and warm. My hand was hovering near her face, the paintbrush dripping slowly onto the plastic between us. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the tiny scar above her lip, the pulse fluttering frantically in her throat. "Jade," she whispered, her voice dropping to a register that sent shivers down my spine. She didn't let go of my wrist. Instead, she guided my hand down, away from her face, until our fingers were interlaced on her knee. I should go wash this off," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But I didn't move. I couldn't. The gravity between us was too strong. "Wait," Clara said softly. She reached up with her other hand, her thumb brushing against my cheek where the paint was. She didn't wipe it away. She just traced the line of the streak, her touch feather light and devastating, "You're so beautiful, Jade. Even covered in paint. Even when you're sad. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The air left the room. My divorce, the scandal, the baby, the future. It all faded into the background. There was only Clara. Her face tilted up towards mine, her lips slightly parted, an invitation written in the curve of her mouth. I leaned in. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was instinct. I wanted to taste the rain on her breath. I wanted to close the distance that had been shrinking since the moment I met her. Our noses brushed. I could feel the heat of her skin radiating against mine. My eyelids fluttered shut, surrendering to the moment. Crack boom! A crack of thunder shook the entire house, so loud it felt like the roof had been torn off. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into absolute darkness. We both jumped back with a gasp, the spell shattered violently by the storm. "Oh my God," Clara breathed in the dark, her voice trembling. "The power goes out whenever the wind hits 50 miles an hour." I sat there in the blackness, my heart still racing, my lips tingling with the ghost of a kiss that hadn't happened. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating Clara's flushed face. She looked as shaken as I felt. I'll go check the breaker box," I said, my voice sounding incredibly loud in the sudden silence. I scrambled to my feet, needing to put distance between us before I did something I couldn't take back. "Be careful," Clara called out after me. I walked into the hallway, the flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or devastated that the lights had gone out. But one thing was certain. The line had been crossed. We weren't just friends painting a room. We were two women standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to push us over. I navigated the hallway by the beam of my phone flashlight, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs that had nothing to do with the thunder. The breaker box was dead, the entire block plunged into a blackout by the fury of the Chicago winter. I made my way back to the nursery, guided by the faint glow of Clara's phone. When I entered the room, she was sitting exactly where I had left her, wrapped in the drop cloth like a makeshift shawl, her eyes wide and reflecting the white light of the LED beam. The air in the room was heavy, charged with the ozone smell of the storm and the unresolved tension of what had almost happened between us. "The power is out for the whole street," I announced, my voice sounding breathy and strange in the silence. I set my phone down on a paint can, pointing the light up at the ceiling to create a diffused, ghostly glow. "We'll have to wait it out." Clara didn't say anything about the lights. She looked up at me, her face stripped of all pretense. "You left," she said simply. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. "Right when things got real, you ran to check a fuse box that you knew wouldn't work." I sank down onto the floor opposite her, the distance between us feeling like a canyon I was terrified to cross. "I didn't run," I lied, though we both knew it was untrue. "I was trying to be practical. I'm the responsible one, remember? I'm the one who fixes things." "You can't fix this with a screwdriver, Jade," Clara whispered. She reached out across the plastic-covered floor, her hand finding mine in the semi-darkness. Her fingers were cool, but her palm was burning. "Stop trying to manage everything. Stop trying to control the narrative. Just be here. With me." I looked at our joined hands, seeing the contrast, my manicured nails, her paint-stained fingers. We were opposites in every way, yet we fit together like two broken pieces of the same puzzle. The wind howled outside, rattling the window pane, a violent reminder of the chaos of the world. But in this half-painted room, in the dark, there was a stillness that terrified me more than the storm. "I'm scared," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could check them. It was the most honest thing I had said in 20 years. "I'm 38 years old. I'm divorcing a man who lied to me for 15 years. And I'm sitting in the dark with a woman who makes me feel things I don't have a name for." Clara squeezed my hand, pulling me gently towards her. I didn't resist this time. I shifted on my knees until I was close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. "You don't need a name for it," she said softly. "You just need to feel it. You've spent your whole life being numb, Jade. Isn't it time you woke up?" She raised her hand to my face again, tracing the line of my jaw where the green paint had dried. Her touch was a question and a promise all at once. I closed my eyes, leaning into her palm, surrendering my control. The scent of her, vanilla, rain, and paint, filled my senses, drowning out the logical part of my brain that was screaming about risks and consequences. "I don't want to go back to sleep," I whispered, opening my eyes to find hers searching mine. The flashlight cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the vulnerability and the fierce hope burning there. "I want to be awake. I want to be here." "Then show me," Clara breathed. I leaned in, slow and deliberate this time. There was no thunder to interrupt us, only the sound of our own ragged breathing. I brushed my lips against hers, a feather-light contact that sent a shockwave through my entire body. Her lips were soft and yielding, tasting of peppermint tea. It wasn't a kiss of hunger or desperation. It was a kiss of homecoming. It was the feeling of finally finding the right key for a lock I had been trying to open for decades. Clara made a small sound in her throat, a soft hum of approval, and deepened the kiss. Her hands moved to my hair, tangling in the strands, pulling me closer until there was no air left between us. I wrapped my arms around her, careful of her belly, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. The kiss grew more urgent, pouring weeks of confusion, anger, and longing into a single shared breath. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. I wasn't worrying about how I looked or if I was doing it right. I was just feeling. I felt the curve of her mouth, the heat of her skin, the frantic beat of her heart against my chest. It was messy and perfect and terrifyingly real. We pulled apart slowly, breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. The room felt different now. The darkness wasn't oppressive. It was protective. It was a cocoon that held just the two of us. "Wow," Clara whispered, a breathless laugh bubbling up in her chest. She kept her eyes closed, as if savoring the aftershocks. "That was worth the wait." I laughed too, a sound of pure relief. "Yes," I agreed, stroking her cheek with my thumb. "It definitely was." We sat there in the dark for a long time, holding each other while the storm raged outside. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know how we would explain this to the lawyers or the world. But as I felt Clara's hand resting over my heart, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just fixing a nursery. I was building a life. 3 weeks after the storm, on a Tuesday morning that smelled of thawing snow and wet pavement, Clara's water broke all over the kitchen floor while I was making toast. There was no panic, no cinematic screaming, just a stunned silence as we looked at the puddle, then at each other, and then simultaneously burst into action. I grabbed the hospital bag we had packed a month ago, and Clara grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong as the first real contraction hit her. We didn't call Richard. We didn't call anyone. We just got in the car and drove, 2 women rewriting the definition of family with every mile marker we passed. The delivery room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital was a blur of beeping monitors and nurses with kind eyes, who assumed, without asking, that I was the other mother. I didn't correct them. Standing there in my comfortable clothes, wiping sweat from Clara's forehead with a cool cloth, I realized I was the other mother. Biology had done its part, but love was doing the heavy lifting now. "I can't do this," Clara gasped hours later, her face pale and twisted in pain. She crushed my hand, her knuckles white. "Jade, it hurts too much. I'm not strong enough." "Yes, you are," I said, leaning in close so she could see her own strength reflected in my eyes. I brushed the damp hair back from her face, my voice steady even though my own heart was racing. You walked away from a man who lied to you. You built a new life from scratch. You are the strongest woman I know, Clara. And you are going to meet your son in a few minutes. She looked at me, searching for an anchor in the storm of labor. Stay with me, she whispered. Don't let go. I'm not going anywhere, I promised, intertwining our fingers. I'm right here. We're doing this together, and we did. When the doctor announced that it was time to push, I didn't step back. I held her leg. I counted her breaths. I became her external lungs when she forgot how to breathe. I watched the woman I loved break herself open to bring life into the world, and the awe I felt was a physical weight in my chest. It was messy, and it was loud, and it was the most terrified I had ever been, but it was also the most present I had ever felt. Then suddenly, the room was filled with a sound that changed the frequency of the universe, a sharp, indignant cry. The doctor lifted a small, wriggling creature into the air, slick and red and furious. It's a boy, the doctor announced, smiling behind her mask. A healthy, loud baby boy. They placed him on Clara's chest, and the room went silent. I watched Clara's face transform. The pain vanished, replaced by a look of pure, blinding adoration. She touched his tiny cheek with a trembling finger, tears streaming down her face. Hi, she whispered to him. Hi, little one. I'm your mama. She looked up at me, her eyes shining. Jade, look at him. I leaned over, terrified to intrude but unable to stay away. He was tiny, with a shock of dark hair, and a scowl that looked suspiciously like his father's. But his chin was all Clara. He opened his eyes, dark and unfocused, and seemed to look right through me. Do you want to cut the cord, Dad? The nurse asked, looking around for a man who wasn't there. Then she looked at me, realizing her mistake, and smiled apologetically. Or, Mom? I looked at Clara. It was her choice. It was her moment. But Clara didn't hesitate. She nodded at me, her eyes fierce. Yes, she told the nurse. She will do it. My hands shook as I took the surgical scissors. This was it, the final severance from the past. By cutting this cord, I wasn't just separating the baby from the womb. I was severing the tie to Richard, to the lies, to the old life. I was claiming my place in this new one. I took a deep breath and made the cut. Clean, decisive, permanent. Later, after the nurses had cleaned him up and swaddled him in a blanket that looked like a burrito, the room was quiet. Clara was half asleep, exhausted but peaceful. I was sitting in the rocking chair by the bed, holding the baby, our baby, in my arms. He was sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that calmed my own racing heart. I looked down at his face, tracing the curve of his ear with my pinky finger. I felt a surge of love so intense it almost knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't the polite, distant affection I had been trained to show in my social circles. It was a fierce lioness kind of love. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would kill for this child. I would die for this child. And I would spend every day of the rest of my life making sure he knew he was wanted, not as a secret, but as a celebration. Clara stirred in the bed, opening her eyes sleepily. You look good with him, she mumbled, a smile touching her lips. Natural. I feel complete, I admitted, looking from the baby to the woman who had given him to me. Thank you, Clara, for sharing him, for sharing your life. Jade, she said softly, reaching out her hand towards me. I stood up and walked to the side of the bed, shifting the baby to one arm so I could take her hand. We're a family now, you, me, and Leo. Leo? I asked, testing the name. It sounded strong, like a lion. Leo, she confirmed, squeezing my hand. It means lion, because his mothers are fierce. I leaned down and kissed her forehead, then her lips, a soft seal on our new reality. Outside, the Chicago winter was melting into spring. The snow was gone. The cold was a memory. Inside this room, everything was warm and bright and just beginning. 6 months later, the Chicago summer was in full swing. The air was thick with the scent of blooming lilacs and the distant sound of lawnmowers, a stark contrast to the silent, frozen winter night when my life had fallen apart. I was sitting on the back porch of our new house in Evanston, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and violet. It wasn't a penthouse in the sky, and it wasn't a drafty bungalow. It was a sprawling Victorian with a wraparound porch and a garden that needed weeding. Perfectly imperfect, just like us. Inside, I could hear the sounds of my new life. The rhythmic thump-thump of Leo crawling across the hardwood floor, determined to catch the family cat. The clatter of pots and pans as Clara attempted to make paella, singing along to the radio in her terrible, wonderful voice. These were the sounds I had been starving for my entire adult life, and now I had a banquet of them every single day. I looked down at the book in my lap, but I hadn't read a page in 20 minutes. I was too busy reflecting on the strange, winding road that had brought me here. If I hadn't found that receipt in Richard's pocket, if I hadn't driven into the blizzard, if I hadn't decided to help the woman who was supposed to be my enemy, I would still be Mrs. Bittencourt, the perfect wife in the glass tower, slowly freezing to death from the inside out. The screen door creaked open, and Clara stepped out, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. She was wearing a simple sundress, her hair growing out into a soft bob, the purple streaks replaced by her natural, rich brunette. She looked healthy, happy, and so beautiful it made my chest ache. "Dinner is almost ready," she said, handing me a glass and sitting down on the swing next to me. "Leo is terrorizing the cat again. I think we have a future track star on our hands." I smiled, taking a sip of the tart lemonade. "He gets his energy from you. Thank God he has my organizational skills, or he'd never find his toys." Clara laughed, leaning her head on my shoulder. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies start to blink in the tall grass. The legal battle was a distant memory. Richard and Marcos had settled quietly, terrified of exposure. I had sold the penthouse and used the money to start my own legal consultancy for women in high-conflict divorces. Clara was finishing her degree in art therapy. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked softly, tracing the pattern of the wicker chair with her finger. "The old life? The parties, the drivers, the ease of it?" I turned to look at her, really look at her. I saw the woman who had held my hand in the dark, the woman who had given me a son, the woman who had taught me that love wasn't about performing perfection, but about embracing the mess. "I don't miss a single second of it," I answered, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. I was rich, Clara, but I was bankrupt. I had everything, but I had nothing. I reached out and took her hand, interlacing our fingers. Now I have the noise. I have the mess. I have the love. I'm finally wealthy. Clara smiled, that brilliant, sun-drenched smile that had saved me that first night. She leaned in and kissed me, a slow, sweet, lingering kiss that tasted of lemons and promise. "I love you, Jade." "I love you too," I whispered against her lips. From inside the house, a baby's laugh rang out, followed by the crash of a plastic toy. We pulled apart, laughing. "Duty calls," Clara said, standing up and pulling me with her. "Come on, Mom. Let's go rescue the cat." I followed her inside, leaving the sunset behind. I didn't need to watch the sun go down anymore. My son was right here, in this house, holding my hand. And for the first time in 38 years, I knew exactly who I was and exactly where I belonged. Thank you so much for watching our story. It wasn't easy to live through it, but sharing it with you has been a healing journey. If you believe in the power of second chances and love that breaks all the rules, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us share more stories like this. See you in the next one.